I'm excited. I'm excited that they're coming. I'm excited they're at my back door. I am waiting to see what the culmination of all this is. It, to me, is something that is at the forefront of a breakthrough. The activity that we're looking at right now is about 7 times more than the usual. We've put together all our information so that we have a map of all the sightings. A lot of people have reported different objects, and it's interesting to note that these objects vary from a cylinder-shaped object to a boomerang to a spear. 80%, maybe 90% of these sightings are actually IFOs. But there's always that unexpected 10 to 5% that remain unexplained, and that's what I'm after. The first thing I do is to ask, what would be the motive? What would be their reason for coming forward and actually saying, I'm seeing these things?
I realized it was, a solid object. It wasn't shaped like a plane. I've never seen anything like a plane that looked like that. It didn't make any noise. It moved very slow. If that was a plane, it would have fell right out of the sky.
As Cliff is telling his story, I'm thinking, here's an average person, a retired person, wakes up in the middle of the night and sees something he doesn't understand.
Greetings, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Topic UFO. What you just saw was a short video collage starring our guest for the evening, Miss Anna Manalo. For those of you that remember that clip, that was from a show called UFOs Over Earth, and it was about the Bucks County flap back in 2008, I believe. Some amazing stuff happened during that case, and I definitely want to talk to Anna about that. Anna comes a long way in her career. She started as a paranormal researcher and then went into field investigation for MUFON, and now she is focusing on script writing, and she's going to talk to us about that as well. She's won several awards, finalist for the Writers Place Screenwriting Competition in 2012. She's ranked high in the top 10 of horror thriller entries, and she's one after another. We'll talk to her more about that. But she's here tonight to talk to us about all of these different things that she's been involved with since a very early age, I might add. So I think we'll just go ahead and get her on. Anna, are you out there, ma'am?
Yes, I am, Rick. How are you?
I'm doing great. I tell you, Anna, we met kind of by accident on, again, Facebook.
Yes.
And, I saw your profile picture, and we were chatting back and forth, and I said, this lady looks familiar to me. I don't know where I saw her before. But, and then it dawned on me that I saw you on this UFOs Over Earth episode, which, by the way, is one of my all-time favorite episodes of any television UFO shows. I definitely want to talk to you about that Bucks County flap, because that was some amazing stuff. But you have so much going on, and you've been doing this now for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
But your introduction into the paranormal started at a very early age, in regards to the Mothman prophecies, or whatever they're called, hauntings, the Mothman. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's a very personal story. It was actually retold to me because at that time, it was about 1964. I was only about two and a half years old. It started with my father, who, as a matter of fact, actually is the writer in the family, the original writer in the family. He was freelance for quite a number of years, and then married my mother, and we ended up living in a little town that's just about maybe 30 miles outside of Manila in the Philippines. He started sensing something malevolent outside the window of a rather small townhouse. Where we were living at the time was a rental apartment that was an up and down type of situation. There were neighbors to the right and to the left. But for some reason, in the evening, he started to sense that there was something outside his window. And he actually had a study that overlooked a creek. And right at the edge of that creek, there was a huge tree. And there's several theories about what he saw. Whatever it was that he saw for a couple of years before, tragically, he actually took his own life. What was seen by a number of people after he passed away, where this creature actually followed us into my grandmother's house about 3 miles from that vicinity, was a creature about 9 feet tall. It had kind of like the eyes of a goat. It had pupils, kind of like a snake's. And it actually had horns, like real horns on the top of its head. It had the wings of a bat, and a lot of people described it as being leather-like, which kind of reminds me of that creature in Jeepers Creepers.
Oh, yeah.
But it's not quite like that, because they said it also had kind of like an armor around it, which made me think that it was also possibly an alien or a reptilian, some kind of an amalgamation of something that is possibly even interdimensional. So my curiosity was piqued at a very young age. I actually heard about this story for the first time when I was about maybe 9 or 10 years old. And I had repeated nightmares. When you're a child, you're impressionable. You hear about these things. And to this day, we really don't know what it was. But eventually the creature had entered the house, apparently through the window. And this thing was exceeding the height of the ceiling, so it was actually leaning over him. And then one afternoon, he was left alone, and apparently whatever it was had manifested, and he eventually took his own life. That's my... Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess I was a little confused. So this, I guess, was some type of quote-unquote Mothman sighting, but it didn't take place in the United States where
No, it did not.
Oh, okay. But
Yeah.
the descriptions are similar of the same.
Very much so, yeah.
Wow. What do you remember what town that was in the Philippines?
It was called Little Baguio.
Little Baguio. Okay.
Little Baguio, Baguio, is kind of like a borough. Very small little village it's actually a suburb right outside of a town called San Juan, where my grandparents resided. And a few months after this event where he actually took his own life, we moved to my grandmother's house, which was about 3 miles away. It was actually walking distance, and this creature actually followed us.
Well, I tell you, I was going to tell you, as you know, my wife is Filipino, has a lot of family in the Philippines, and I know that they have seen strange things over there as well. I don't know what it is about the Philippines that they have this type of activity, but...
And we have our share of UFO sightings. As a matter of fact, there is a huge UFO Society of the Philippines, they call it over there. It has tons of members, hundreds of members. They were actually trying to get some kind of chapter membership with MUFON. This was a while back. I think it was after 2009. As you know, the UFO flap here where I am now in Bucks County was back April 2008 to probably about November. The following year, they contacted me, and we were talking about the possibility of connecting with MUFON. They've had their share of UFO sightings. And in the vicinity where I was living in the mid 60s, early 70s, there was quite a proliferation of what I would call close encounter, first kind, second kind, where you actually saw ground effects evidence. And at the time, it wasn't that developed yet in terms of investigating over there. They didn't have like a book, as you would call it, with MUFON, where there was a manual as to how to cordon off an area, how to formally investigate, how to get people on the ground to actually interview people before their accounts got cold, so to speak.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
So you were introduced into paranormal activity at a young age, and then at some point you came to the States, and then was your next involvement with MUFON, or was there something between this Mothman sighting stuff and MUFON?
Honestly, there was a period of time when I did a lot of reading, because when you encounter things of this nature repeatedly as a child and into your teen years, you kind of begin to wonder, with the number of people that are telling you different things that are going on and different sightings, you start doing your own reading. Mm-hmm. And, I eventually started delving into different books, started learning about different dimensional things. There was I believe it was like a Tibetan Lama by the name of Lobsang Rampa, and I don't even know if he's alive to this day, but I remember being very impressed about his theories of reincarnation, et cetera, dimensional beings and things like that. So the more and more I delved into it, the more engrossed I became, until finally in the beginning of 2007, and at this point I'm now, in my 40s, I started looking at doing actual investigations. So I heard about MUFON, got the manual, started studying it, and lo and behold, I was actually done with taking the test, passed the test the first time I took it, in time for the UFO flap in 2008. And I tell you, that was a lot of activity.
Yeah, great timing.
Yes.
So now for anyone that hasn't seen that episode of UFOs over Earth, the Bucks County flap, it's out on YouTube. Go look at it, watch it. These two witnesses are probably two of the most believable people you could possibly, hope to get. I know that I was very much drawn to the young blonde lady that had the twinkling that came down and fell into the trees and then got sucked. Denise.
Yes.
And then got sucked back up into the spaceship or the craft or whatever it was. Now, what were you thinking? Because you were obviously involved closely during this flap. What kind of thoughts? Because I know, we see these things on television. Even these UFO shows are edited up quite a bit. What was going through your mind during this UFO flap? What were you thinking?
I was totally fascinated. I was totally fascinated by the fact that we were actually looking at real people, interviewing very down-to-earth people, number one. These are not people really who have a vested interest in looking like kooks, okay? They have everything to lose, and yet they went out there and actually told the story and are on TV, publicly telling everybody what's happening to them. Denise wasn't my case, but certainly the other gentleman was.
Right.
And his case was very intriguing for reasons, that are obvious. I would rather not name him. Right. But I called the case the Carversville phenomena, which is actually an area that is pretty isolated. It's mostly residential. And as you saw in the show, it was a rather sizable plot of land. And that's where on the morning of, I would say, around 4 o'clock in the morning, he rose up from a sound sleep and looked out his picture window and saw an octagonal craft less than 500 feet just break the cloud cover. It was almost like it was sailing towards him, and then it turned. It paused in front of his window and turned at less than 500 feet, and it looked like it had flags. And if you saw the show again, it doesn't show you the creatures inside, but this is an actual bona fide, what they would call a close encounter of the third kind.
Well, they don't talk about that on the show, do they?
They talked about, actually the way they did it was they interviewed him right on camera. We were actually in his bedroom where he saw the sighting from the picture window, and he was showing us. And I think what they did was they did an animation of the actual craft, the saucer that he saw.
Right, but they didn't talk about him seeing an entity inside of it.
Correct. They did not. The actual account, there were a couple of creatures that were looking out the window. So wow. We're looking now at something that is by a gentleman who is highly respected in the community, who has worked for years, very down to earth, very pragmatic, actually sharing an account. And it was pretty close to him. It was less than 500 feet. It broke cloud cover. For some reason, it turned right by his house and then proceeded. I'm trying to remember now because it's been quite a long time. I think it went on a westerly direction. We actually had radar returns. The other investigator, who now is a chief investigator for another state, got radar returns from the airport, the international airport, and verified that there was a huge object that had gone through the airspace.
Now,
so
why do you think the producers of UFOs over Earth did not include the fact that he saw entities looking out of the window? Did they think that was just too bizarre to put on the air?
You know, I don't know. I know we filmed for a number of weeks. They were pretty long hours. I was only there for part of it where I was involved in the filming. I do know I've had numerous conversations because this was my case. I had numerous conversations with that witness without the TV people there. Mm-hmm. And so I actually was privy to other information that he would rather not disclose on the episode. And I will hold, true to that.
Right.
I know that there were other events, leave it at that. But it was a very intriguing case because I'm talking to a person who really has no reason to fabricate, lie, or embellish. So that was definitely a close encounter of the third kind, as they would say in the movie. Definitely there were entities inside that ship.
Wow.
Yep.
Just mind-boggling yep. Because, like I say, I did not know that. And I'm sure that, anyone else that just saw the television program, it was not shown.
Yeah.
So I take it, though, this was a flap. So this was just two of many sightings that took place over there, right?
Oh, definitely. I've had a number of CE4 cases. Those are the fourth kind where they actually were abducted. That happened actually after this particular flap. And you got to bear in mind, we're talking an increase of sightings to 700%. Of that 700%, a majority of them were what you would call lights in the sky, which is the most common CE1 type of, 500 or over 500 feet from the viewer. I saw this light in the sky. I don't know whether it was the International Space Station. I don't know if it was Venus. I saw a formation, etc. So we also had that variety. We also had different kinds of configurations. Some saw triangles, some saw cigar-shaped objects, some saw things that looked like stars. There were some that were formations. There were some that were spheres. But the ones that I got that were the most intriguing, interestingly enough, came probably after Thanksgiving, after UFOs over Earth. As you know, when people see you on TV, they flock. Mm-hmm. They see you, they, come up to you in the street. People you don't know, they just say, I recognize you. And then they tell you their story. It's one thing for someone to tell you a story, and it's another for them to actually come forward with either photographs, and they're very hard to get. Mm-hmm. A lot of these things, particularly if it's just a handheld camera, or maybe perhaps a cell phone, it's very hard to catch them. Some of them are not sensitive to film. So what you're going to get is basically, what is it? It's just a light. That's all that there is to it. There's nothing else. But a lot of them were very reluctant to come forward. So I ended up recording them on the MUFON website by myself. They were not willing to give their names. They were not willing to give other witnesses' names to get collaboration, which is important. But we've had one case, and I remember this. A gentleman came up to me, and I was actually buying wine in a neighborhood wine store about 3 weeks after the show came on the air for the first time. And he indicated to me, he was with this woman. They were jogging, and he knows her very well, so he trusts her story. He had left her jogging on a path, and this was a state park not far from here. It's on the New Jersey border. It was approaching dusk, so the park was closing, and he needed to leave. She decided, because she had arrived later than him, to complete her 6-mile jog. She then proceeded to jog down the path, leaving her car alone on a deserted parking lot. And as she was heading down towards a copse of trees, she happened to turn back because she got a sense there were lights behind her. Okay, now picture this. There's no one else in the park at this point. The dusk had approached. The sun was starting to set. People who normally were there either were leaving or had left. So at some point, she's running down this path by herself. And you wonder, who would do this? But she did. She wanted to do her 6-mile run. She's running away from her car towards a narrow area in the woods. Suddenly, she senses there's lights behind her. She turns around and she's thinking, oh boy, I'm not supposed to be here because the park closes. There are probably cops. So she turns around and she sees a pair of lights and figures, oh, it's definitely a cop. So she starts to turn around, walk back towards her car with the intention of maybe saying, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't realize the park closed. I'm going to get in my car. She gets towards her car and realizes the set of lights that are approaching her are above the roof of her car. She reaches for the door, and as she's opening it, she gets this sensation, like as if the whole area is vibrating. She manages to get in the car. It's almost like an earthquake, I guess. She manages to get in the car. She shuts the door. Next thing she knows, against her will, she's opening the door. She's coming out the door. She turns around to the back of the car, where now we have 2 sets of lights. There were actually 3. And one is aimed at her. And from those lights, a creature was walking towards her, a bipedal creature, probably 7.5 feet tall. And as it got closer and closer, she became more and more terrified, but she could not move a muscle. And it came about a foot in front of her face, and then it reached out. And I kid you not, Rick, I kid you not, I actually was flabbergasted, and I could not believe what this man was telling me. It was a praying mantis.
You're kidding.
It was a full-size praying mantis. It had the face of a praying mantis, the appendage, the long arms, and it reached towards her, and as soon as it touched her, the next thing she knew, it was daylight. Okay, we were talking probably 8 p.m., 7 p.m. It was 6 a.m. when she looked at her watch. She was sitting on the driver's seat of her car. She looked up, she could hear the birds chirping, so she knew it was morning. And she had these punch holes running to the end of her leg towards, kind of like towards the bone of her ankle.
Wow.
On both sides of her legs. She then proceeded to drive home the best she could, and then she contacted this man who was talking to me there outside that wine store. And apparently she wanted him to come to the house. She was in shock. She called off from work. She didn't know what to do. He took her to the doctor because it seemed like she was very disoriented. It seemed like she was in the middle of a nervous breakdown. They get to the doctor, and the little punch holes had disappeared. So it's...
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's very elusive. We've had... Go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, I mean, I wonder what percentage of people that have experiences such as that, keep it to themselves. I'm just wondering how many stories are out there, never been heard before, because people are just afraid, and understood they'd be afraid to talk about it. But
and I think the part here that really surprised me was they were willing to approach me and tell me in detail. Here I am, I'm standing in the middle of the street holding 2 wine bottles on my way home. They got so caught up in the story, they didn't even realize, my goodness, this woman's on her way home from work. And I'm standing there and I'm totally engrossed. And I started encouraging him, could you please get on the website and report this? And the man said, I told her I would respect her confidence. I just wanted to let you know. And a lot of the cases that I got were of that nature. They did not want to publicly share it. They didn't even want to put it on a website.
Right.
Which is frustrating because we need to have an accounting of all these things that are going on.
Absolutely.
And the other intriguing ones came from dispatch. After I worked as a field investigator, I also ended up working for dispatch, which is for the Star team of MUFON. And I don't know if you're familiar with that segment of MUFON, which it still runs to this day, as a matter of fact. They have field investigators that can be deployed within 24 hours of an event. I was pretty much more, behind the scenes at the computer, looking at the cases as they were coming in from all over, all over the U.S., in some cases, some parts of the world. And there were some really significant cases there of abduction. What we did was we figured out, is this worthy of having a ground crew sent over to actually investigate in real time? So my task was to interview in detail the person that just reported it before the story got cold. People changed their stories with time. And I got one that was, the woman, I believe, was traumatized. I don't think her case was actually investigated. I did report it to the supervisor, and they in turn would decide whether it was worthy of real people going in real time. This was somewhere in North America, northern America, probably in the area of Minnesota, Wisconsin. The woman was living by herself. Apparently she had grown children, still lived in the original home. So it was a pretty sizable home, probably about 5 to 7 bedrooms. Obviously they were well-to-do. They had a lot of land, and on one side of the house there was a field, and at the edge of the field there was a forest. And she indicated to me that she had, at the time of my call, which was probably about 10 or 15 minutes, less than that even, after she had reported what was happening to her, she said she was glad I called her because there was no one that was coming home that night, and she was alone. So I'm now talking to a terrified woman who's telling me that the night before there was a huge red light right by the edge of the forest. And because she couldn't sleep from the intensity of the light, she came towards the window to close the blinds or, draw the blinds. And somehow she sensed that it was coming closer. And so just out of curiosity, even though she was afraid, she started to peek and was totally appalled that the light was much larger than the moon, that it was actually approaching, going past the field and towards the house. So at that point, she shut the window. This is a summer night. She shut the window, she ran to the bed, and just like a child, she covered herself up in the covers. This is a full-grown, middle-aged woman. Something happened because somehow she found herself lying ramrod straight on the bed, sensed that there were two entities in the room with her. And then one proceeded to then try to, I think it went through her navel. It extended a rod, went through her navel, and apparently was trying to extract something internally from her, and she was in so much pain.
Wow.
She doesn't know whether she passed out. She doesn't know whether maybe she was having a bad dream, but all she knew was that the next morning she had, the sheets were all rumpled. It seemed like she was struggling. She couldn't believe time had passed that quickly. So once again, you have one of the indicators, which is missing time.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, when you mentioned the red light, the red ball, kind of sounds like what they saw at Rendlesham Forest, with this red ball type of thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's amazing some of the similarities that you hear on these cases.
Yes, there is. And this one was pretty devastating because she discovered a week later that she had some rare form of cancer in that area where they were actually probing. So the question remains, were they introducing something to her that created the cancer? Or did she have that and they were actually trying to help her deal with whatever it is that they detected she had? And it's two rivaling theories. Some people see them as being benevolent. Some people see them as being, obviously things that experiment on people, and maybe they were trying to put something in her to make her ill. She actually called the dispatch a second time. I believe it was just a few days after that first phone call to indicate that they had visited again and that she had been diagnosed with cancer. So that was a pretty traumatic, permanent one.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing with the cancer, that's very strange. I'm not sure if I don't know.
Yeah, it's bizarre. It's bizarre, and you don't know what to believe. It's
right.
It's one of those things. It's not investigated, so we'll never know. It was not something that we chose to follow through on. I think a lot of the cases, there were so many cases, it was not possible to send a crew to all of them. So we had to handpick those that we felt was the most believable. And in this case, the woman was hysterical. I hate to say it. She sounded like she was really terrified for her life. She sounded like she really needed someone there immediately. What happened the next following days, apparently her son came, took her, and she had an examination. We'll never know. I mean, it's a chicken and egg problem.
Right.
Definitely.
One thing I wanted to ask you now, when you were involved with MUFON, Bigelow was still attached to
Correct.
MUFON, right?
Yes, and Bigelow, actually, it's funny that you mentioned that because Bigelow was the one that funded the STAR team.
Right.
And paid dispatchers.
Exactly. And that's what I wanted to ask you. Now, I don't know, you're not formally attached to MUFON anymore as a
No,
field
not at
investigator?
this point. And that was the next topic I was going to talk about. I mean, I had more than 144 cases in the year and a half that I was with MUFON. I pretty much ended my relationship after I helped coordinate a conference in 2009. I had so much information. I had so many stories to tell that I felt, being that my writing was more a strong skill for me than investigating. I mean, I'm very good at interviewing, but honestly, I'm not very good with tools. I don't know how to measure trace evidence on the ground. And I thought, my goodness, what I could probably reach a bigger audience by writing about these stories. And what better way to write them, since I'm very visual, to write them in screenplays.
So, I see, right. Yeah. And plus, I mean, you lived them, right?
I lived them. I've seen the witnesses. I know exactly what it feels like to be there. So there's nothing like being in the first person to actually hear a witness recount these terrifying stories. And not all of them are terrifying. Some of them actually are pretty redemptive. Some of them are some are more spiritual, I have to say. And it's interesting. There's quite a diverse population of people.
And I think I just think that makes so much difference. When you hear somebody who comes from a religious background or is very highly religious, the way they describe UFO ET cases is completely different from somebody that doesn't come from a religious background or who is not religious.
Right.
You know, there's definitely some type of slant to the story. I don't know whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, but it's there. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I always think of it as, the person interprets the event through the lens of their previous experience.
Right.
And, it could come out being a learning tool for them, an epiphany for them, or it could be just, it was totally terrifying. When I wrote my screenplays, I have 6 of them. Actually, 2 of them are horror genre, and they're also true to life. The other 4 are sci-fi. Actually, my latest one is an adaptation, and, I want to put in a plug for Philip Mantel, who's a wonderful British UFO investigator, publisher of a couple of magazines. He allowed me to adapt his book called Roswell Alien Autopsy. And it's being marketed right now as High Strangeness. That's the title of the screenplay. And it talks about the Roswell alien and whether the autopsy was true or not. It's very riveting. It's an action adventure sci-fi, but it has led me to have a lot of stories that give the whole entire expansive feel of what it is like to have an actual encounter with something no one can understand, that you cannot understand. And
right.
A lot of these, though they were written for entertainment, I call them grounded sci-fi, and I guess in Hollywood you would call them grounded sci-fi because they're extremely believable.
And based on some sort of fact, right?
Yeah. Well, a lot of them extensively without naming names. And sometimes what I do is I take 2 cases, I put them together. I think whatever I can do, and especially youth who are very open-minded,
right?
If we can somehow reach them and we can tell them there are definitely other worlds out there, and other beings, other creatures that defy explanation, that exist either with us or somewhere in the universe, that are somehow trying to make contact and have been trying to make contact for a very long time.
Well, Anna, just look at the amount of television shows that have been created over the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And, they wouldn't keep making these things if people weren't watching them. Because, when it comes to television, it's ratings, ratings, ratings. And what it tells me is that people are interested in this subject. They do have questions.
Definitely.
I'm sure a lot of them have had some type of sighting or, some activity been involved in their life. And, as the generations go by, right now it's becoming much more acceptable to talk about these things. I mean, you've got the show Cosmos on Fox now, prime time on Sundays, where, you know, I don't know if they come out and say it, but they sure bring up the possibility of life is very high.
Yes.
I just think we really need to start opening up a little bit more. Well, listen, Anna, we're getting down on time. We only have a couple more minutes.
Sure, sure.
I wanted to ask you, do you have a website or something that people can go to learn more about you and the work
Sure.
that you're doing?
I have my screenplays, the synopses and the log lines and things of that nature, just to give everybody an introduction what I write about. The actual little blurbs of the stories are in there, as well as my awards. If you type in www.storyartisan, one word, .wordpress.com,
Okay.
that will come up with a picture of my face. And that will give the producer or whoever is interested an idea of the type of stuff that I write. I write mostly sci-fi, supernatural thrillers. I've also been writing drama as well. But the next two screenplays I'm planning on writing actually is another book by Paul Stonehill this time and Philip Mantell. They're co-authors. And I'm planning on calling it Height 611. Height as in hill, 611. And it's set in Russia. And it centers around an area that had a UFO crash. It's an obscure case, but it's right next to a case that has been world-renowned called the Tunguska event.
Right.
So that's the next adaptation I'm going to be writing. And I've also got two that are supernatural that are on my slate. So I'm going to have a very busy rest of the year.
Wow, that's excellent. I tell you, you've led a very interesting life, Anna, and
Thank you.
I wish I could have been involved in some of those things you were involved in, because those are things that most people will never get to do, never be so close to. And, you know, just one quick thing I wanted to mention
Sure.
from that Bucks County flap, Denise, she's now involved in ufology, going around and talking, doesn't she?
Yeah, I believe so. After that particular show, I know she was in the, I'm trying to think of the name of the show, with John Ventry once again.
Right.
She was planning on a career, something to do with, you know, being on television. So I think that was something that did come to fruition, and good luck to her. I mean, she, you know, she presented very well on the show. She was extremely articulate. So
Yeah.
that was a good thing.
Very
Yeah,
believable,
definitely.
too.
Yes, she's very credible. Yeah.
Well, listen, Anna, it's been absolutely phenomenal having you on. I can't thank you
Thank you.
enough. And
Thank you.
we'll give out the website again. You can look at the bottom of your screen there for that. And Anna, we'll definitely stay in touch. And I guess the best word to end the show would be salamat.
Oh,
Right?
thank you too.
All right. Well, listen, Anna, thanks again, and we'll stay in touch.
Have a good night.
Bye-bye. Good night, everyone.
Open the door, you'll find the secret. To find the answer is to